As I welcome you and look at you all gathered together under one roof, it seems inconceivable that George should not be here in person. All the friends he loved so much, relied upon, shared ideas and ideals with, and who enabled his wildest dreams to come true. You've come from far and wide, and you could only have come for George. You have come from right here in Israel, and astonishingly and very heartwarming it has been to see that weddings and bar mitzvahs seem to have been put on hold. We, George's family, his daughter and grandchildren, are so grateful to be able to share his 100th birthday right here with you all in the country, which was actually his raison d'être, having spent a momentous year here as President Weizmann's chef de cabinet, and thereafter vowing to do everything he could to help the then fledgling state. It is here that he chose to be buried. It is here, the new Israel National Library, where he wanted his library, which was the heart and soul of our home, to come and stay. And it is just a few yards from here, in Mishkenot, that we met on Teddy Kollek's 80th birthday, celebrating our religious wedding here a year later. Teddy was in fact very fond of reminding us, forever after, that we still owed him his Shatkin commission. The Jerusalem Music Center is a unique place where I first came over 40 years ago. The brainchild of Isaac Stern and Teddy Kollek, and even Isaiah Berlin. It opened in 1973, a place where young musicians are inspired and nurtured, and where the world's greatest artists have come to give masterclasses. It benefits since 10 years from having Mario Pariah as its dedicated and very hands-on president, and I'm so grateful to him and to the director, Gadi Abadi, for suggesting quite spontaneously that we celebrate George right here, and then enabling us to do so. I'm also very grateful to Ruti Heshin, who has been such a support in allowing us to continue our celebration with dinner at Yael's garden, also part of Mishkenot, of which she is the president. We hope that this will be a celebration that George himself would enjoy. But one certain thing is that he would be overjoyed to be with you all. And as we celebrate his century, we also celebrate you, who enriched and brought much joy to his life. Before handing over to Solen Plavatnik, and very much in connection with him, I would like us just to pause and think of George's very dear and close friend, Kenneth Bialkin, who passed away just 3 weeks ago, and who we had hoped would be with us today. It was Kenny who introduced Len to George, and their first meeting was the fastest speed date you could ever imagine, during which the baby was already conceived as the Plavatnik School of Government. And it was also the beginning of a unique friendship. Kenny was a dedicated and staunch supporter of Israel, and visits to New York were showered with meetings organized by Kenny, from breakfast to dinner in his office and elsewhere, with like-minded friends and allies. And the focus was always the support of Israel and the fight against anti-Semitism. Antonia Fraser, one of George's oldest and dearest friends, and one of his most prolific and faithful authors, told me that when she heard that George had died, she thought of the following poem, and I promised her that I would read it here on her behalf. I know she wouldn't mind if we think of Kenny, and I like to think of the two old friends, accomplices, and allies now sitting and plotting to their heart's content. They told me, Heraclitus, they told me you were dead. They brought me bitter news to hear and bitter tears to shed. I wept as I remembered how often you and I had tired the sun with talking and sent him down the sky. And now that thou art lying, my dear old Carian guest, a handful of grey ashes, long, long ago at rest, still are thy pleasant voices, thy nightingales awake. For death he taketh all away, but these he cannot take. Len?
Thank you, Annabelle. It seems like almost yesterday when I had the last conversation with George, which was, I think, probably a day before he died. And we were on the phone, and in his fully energetic voice, he said, "Len, you have to continue working for the Jewish people, for our people." And I said, "Of course, George, I will." And that was the last we spoke. On the subject of philanthropy, I'll just have a few kind of relatively random thoughts, but those are my memories of George, who influenced me in my life in many different ways. I met him probably when he was 85 already. Through the introduction of Ken Alcon, who I knew in New York, and when we moved to London, he was one of the first members of establishment, I would say, I met, and there was a very special occasion. We had lunch, and George, in his customary manner, got straight to the point, and he said, "Look, you made a lot of money. You have to do great things." and I said, "Okay, let's think big." And one of the babies produced from that date, as Annabelle mentioned, was the Blavatnik School of Government at Oxford, a very successful graduate school, which prepares high-level government employees. Hopefully future prime ministers. There are quite a few ministers or deputy ministers already, where George, till the last day, was a core chair and was very actively involved. I would say that for me, George became both the uncle and the mentor, which I really never had. So when I spoke last time to the students at Oxford, and they asked, "Well, usually successful people have mentors," and I said, "The only mentor I can think of is George Weidenfeld, who helped to establish the school here at." So he was my mentor primarily on the subject of philanthropy, besides kind of a wider world. And my title, Sir, the knighthood, is to a large degree due to him, or due to his influence and programs we did together, which were quite numerous. And also in his customary manner, at some point, I remember he was probably at that point, 92, 93. I remember we had one meeting and he said, "I think you deserve a title." And I said, "Okay." So I think we should go straight for lordship. I said, "George, maybe we start with a knighthood." He said, No, we're going to go for lordship." And he said, "I'm going to call this guy, I'm going to call this person, I'm going to do this." So he plotted, and eventually I was knighted. And I have many memorable memories of our time together. And I always thought that he's just a great man, I would say, great man in a scale of probably President Paris, maybe Henry Kissinger, and I hope I'm not insulting anyone here. I keep asking around, like I just asked Tom Gross, who is a great man today? And I never can get an answer. I say, who is a great man today, like George was? and I can never get an answer. Nobody comes close. So perhaps somebody here can suggest a name. Because I miss him dearly, and I'd like to have another, maybe a cousin of his statue, if not an uncle. And I wish he was with us today, but his memory is always with us.
All human beings are mortal, but I must admit that there were times when I thought that George would defy this obvious and banal statement and go on living forever. His enormous vitality, which he exercised till the end of his life, made him look like an elemental force of nature. Talking about his death struck me as absurd as talking about the death of the Niagara Fall. I was wrong. Now we are left to celebrate his exciting life by rejoicing his birthday, but then we feel as if his potent and portly presence is still with us, beaming with his ever-changing projects of how to run the world. George was always well-dressed, short on shabby corduroy jackets with leather patches of English dons. For he was urban through and through. There was nothing cloistered about him. Nevertheless, one could envisage George at different time and in different place, clad in sumptuous papal regalia, ready to sit for Velasquez. And yet, with all his imposing image of a grandee, one could still see the child in him. George had a reputation of being charming and cunning, which he was. However, what usually escaped notice was the naive side of him. He saw enough world and time to become a world-weary cynic. Yet cynic he was not. He was saved by his irrepressible optimism and by what he called my future-oriented attitude. He had an historical memory long as the Library of Congress, but he didn't glue him to the past. There were always plans for the future, some on a planetary scale and some on a particle scale, like who would sit next to whom at the dinner table. Small but important. George, the tribal cosmopolitan, was full of harmonious contradictions. Harmonious, for his polarizing side lived amicably side by its negative side. He, the epoch-making publisher of Nabokov's scandalous book Lolita, was also the publisher of the pious Pope John Paul II, Personal Reflections. The cosmos of George was European and transatlantic. It included the big cities of Europe alongside Washington, D.C. and Manhattan, and on the way some important rural manor houses and castles. And of course, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. His tribe was the Israelites, his blend of Jews and Israelis. When we talked about America, I got the impression that George's attitude to America was like the attitude of the seasoned Humboldt to the nymphette Lolita, a mixture of infatuation and exasperation. His truly deep devotion, however, was to his tribe and to Israel as its shrine. In his all-encompassing contradiction, he was able to serve the moderate Weizmann and yet be an admirer of Begin, who in his words injected in him pride in Jewish power. However, naked fists weren't to George's liking, even in defending what he believed is the right cause. Fists should be covered with gloves, coated with thick layers of what we the Israelis call euphemistically hasbara, namely propaganda. Already in 1942, George wrote a book on Goebbels' propaganda machinery, which he dubbed Goebbels' Experiment. To counter Goebbels' propaganda, George worked for the BBC alongside luminaries such as George Orwell on spreading Allies' propaganda across Nazi-occupied countries. George was throughout his adult life busily concerned with publication and propaganda. To be sure, George was a publisher of great flair, a genius of sort. The list of the books he initiated is impressive. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that he as a publisher have changed the literary landscape in the years after the war. As an entrepreneur, he was both imaginative and bold, but also lucky. His 50 pounds advancement to an obscure political don by the name of Harold Wilson turned out to be the best investment he ever made. For the wily Wilson, who recognized George's merits, remained grateful and loyal to George and included him in his list of peerages. Hasbara was instilled in the structure of George's bones. It made him a great believer in its potency and its ability to convert people's view. Thank God that George, knowing that I arrived from his opposite Arctic political pole, never tried to convert me. He was curious enough to hear my heretical views as part of his Balzac-like inquisitiveness into the human comedy. My late wife, Edna, once said to me, "Yes, George is a flirt and a flatterer, but he is one of the select few who are able to listen seriously to women." Well, he listened seriously to Angela Merkel when she was still unknown to the general public. And more importantly, he listened to Annabelle, the life of his life. Lucky George. The story of George's life was well advertised already in his life. But well advertised doesn't mean well understood. Fame and fortune enabled George not just to acquire more fame and fortune, but also to acquire a better class of enemies. His charm and chivalrous Habsburg manners didn't always save him from detractors. He was just too successful to be shielded. But I, for one, and I believe that many of you here, do carry great affection mingled with fond memories towards this bigger-than-life human being, and I feel lucky for having known him. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Ronald Lauder, I'm deeply moved by your words. They were so heartfelt, so sincere, and I am so proud to have been asked to become honorary vice chairman of this remarkable institution, the World Jewish Congress. Deeply honored also with this award, because Theodor Herzl is not just a figure in the tribal annals of the Jewish people, he's also a world figure, but for me personally, the man, his message means a great deal and permeated my personal life, my political life, my professional life. I'm a lifelong Zionist, brought up in Austria. I had the great good fortune to serve in the BBC in an enormously important job in the last few years as a diplomatic correspondent attached to the so-called freedom movements and European governments in exile. That is to say, I had to get stories out of the Free French, General de Gaulle, Sikorsky, Benish, but also the freedom movements, the Free Indians, the Free Africans, and the Zionist organization. And there, of course, I met the old friends and made new friends, Weizmann, Ben-Gurion, Charette, and so on. But Theodor Herzl meant so much to me. He permeated my life, also my professional life. In the 70 years of publishing, I published 3 biographies of Herzl. The last one has only just appeared, written by that great historian, philosopher, and diplomat, Shlomo Avineri. But the man, his message, meant a great deal to me because of 3 aspects that are so important. He was, for me, the last of the great Hebrew prophets. He was for me also the great Redeemer who managed to make some of his prophecies come true. And he was for me also the apostle to the Gentiles. You see, the extraordinary thing about Herzl was that here was a man who moved mountains.
I'm sure that each one of you here remembers when you first met George, that you will have your own memories, your own stories of how your friendship with him began and how it developed over the years. And you will have your own experience of his loss and the hole, maybe the multifaceted hole it has left in your lives. For some of you, it may even feel as if, with George, you had lost a part of your life. In the 3 years since my mother and my father's deaths, I've come to realize quite poignantly the very different, multi-layered nature of mourning a parent. For whereas a special friendship usually develops and grows richer from small beginnings, a parent-child relationship commonly starts with an explosion of love, to which every year and every significant event brings a layer of meaning and complexity, even when the relationship remains a good one. So that in the mourning of a parent, there are layers upon layers to remove and different times to revisit, that each throw a different light on aspects of that relationship. This memorial event has made me revisit the turning point of my 10th birthday. I grew up with my mother in France from the age of 3.5 and used to spend my holidays in England with my father's parents, until, that is, at the age of 10, when I started staying with him. I had not assigned any purpose to this change. I saw this through a child's eyes and assumed that this was simply because at 10 I was now a big girl. It is not until a few weeks ago that I suddenly realized that set 10 was certainly not a big girl in my father's eyes. However, in his eyes, 10 was an age at which he deemed me old enough for him to start taking my cultural education seriously in hand. And where better to start than showing me the most important thing in his life, the name for which, he told me, would be found engraved on his heart when he died, Israel. So my father, his parents, and I came to Israel. It was the early 60s. Unlike my father, unfortunately, I have a very poor visual and factual memory. However, I have a good felt sense and emotional memory. So sadly, I only have 6 memories. And the first is a hazy one, a memory of staying in Herzliya and there being the sea. The other 5 memories, however, are incredibly vivid. First, pervading the air and my whole stay, was the heady splendor of lemon blossom scent that still haunts my senses to this day. I also well remember the impact of seeing rusty, burnt-out armored vehicles, convoy vehicles, alongside of the road, and hearing from my father about their significance. My third memory is of visiting my grandparents' family and feeling that potent mix of old world Vienna and Czernowitz and this new world to which they belonged. And beneath the surface, mixed with their immense pride in their new land, their new home, their new Sabra daughter-in-law, I remember sensing notes of loss and struggle. My fourth powerful memory is arriving at Moshe Dayan's house just as a group of women were leaving it. It was, he told me, the first time that they had agreed to shake his hand, he being a man and a Jew and a soldier. And finally, I remember Teddy Kollek taking us to the newly built Knesset, and my sense of awe and wonder as he told me the story of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and showed us plans of the new museum that was to house them. So although my father may have been disappointed that I was not able to retain his historical lessons, I believe that his first step in taking me in hand was not in vain. For it seems to me that, as these still vivid memories show, this visit was able to instill in me something of the essence and personal significance of the Israel of the early 1960s. And his influence continues still, for after many failed attempts at reading Proust, never getting beyond page 29, I finally finished À la recherche du temps perdu earlier this year. I only wish my father had been alive still, to compare notes with him. And so for his interest in me and my cultural education, I thank my father. And I also thank you for the opportunity you have given me tonight to further pursue this exegesis of memory and of a father-daughter relationship.
It is such a great honor to be here with you tonight and celebrate this great man's life, especially in so symbolic way here in Jerusalem, the city that he loved so much, in a way even lived for, and according to his request, he is now buried in Jerusalem. And as was said before, all of us remember our first meeting with George. And I do remember that when I saw him first time, I was thinking, wow, such a great man, and also the way he looked, well, he was a big man. And this is part of the history of my people. He represents the history of the Jewish people, the way he escaped from the Nazis, the way he represents the values of the State of Israel, the way he helped to all these great leaders in the past to create the State of Israel and to keep the values of the State of Israel. This was the meeting in which I didn't understand that time that it's not only a meeting that represents the past and the history of the Jewish people, but also it's going to be part of my future. Because in a way, George adapted me, taught me, even preached me to how did you say hasbara? Explain, teach the world, teach them about Israel, about the values of the State of Israel, about what Israel need to do. You should come more, you should do this and that. And it was always, always, always about the State of Israel, the Jewish people, against anti-Semitism. And it was for, not just against, but for making the world a better place. So George was a great man of a great people, and we are all talking about the way he was looking for a better life for Jews, making Israel a better place, a secure place, representing the Jewish value, having Israel a Jewish democratic state. But I would like to say that for George, it was not less important to keep the world a better place for mankind. Yes, I know that these are big words. But he knew something that is very Jewish thing, hakarat hatov. He was rescued when he was a child by Christians. And years later, he always remembered that it's a matter of being a human being, and therefore, when he could help others, this is what he did. And I believe that when we are all talking about the State of Israel, listen, these are quite difficult days, not only for the State of Israel. The world is changing. And unfortunately, the world is changing, and also the set of values that we all here believe in, the set of values that George believed in, all this is changing in the world. People were talking here about the United States of America, about Europe, about Britain, about the State of Israel. And in a way, I think that what we are doing here tonight is not just celebrating the life of a man, but preserving the values that he represented in his life and fought for. Because this is what we believe in. Now I know that, listen, today's elections in Israel, I'm not going to make this a political event. I'm not in politics anymore. But I think that I can tell now that George wanted to create international Kadima when I was the leader of Kadima. And I can tell it now because, unfortunately, George is dead and Kadima is dead. But the values that we believe in, the reason for creating this kind of party, the reason that we fought for, all this is to keep Israel in the same manner, the same way, all these great leaders that we all remember, and their names were mentioned here tonight, they had a dream. The dream came true. And it is not just the mere existence of the State of Israel. It's being a Jewish democratic state when these values are living in harmony, not in contradiction, a state that lives in peace with its neighbors. And therefore, it's a great honor to be here tonight with you, his friends. And George was not only a personal friend of all of us, but it was also a great, I don't want to say a friend of the State of Israel, it was part of the State of Israel. And in a way, I know how much the State of Israel, the Israeli citizen, really owe to George. And I think that he knew in his life and before he died how much he's being appreciated, not only in the United Kingdom, not only in Europe, not only in Germany, not only by those that are part of what he did in his life in terms of literature and music, but how grateful the citizens of Israel were. And I hope that he knew it. I think that he knew it. And therefore, we are all in this great event. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. Thank you for the opportunity to say these few words about really a great, great man, a great friend, supporter of the State of Israel, who truly loved, was part of the Jewish people, loved the Jewish people, and fought for the values of the Jewish people, including love thy neighbor, hakarat hatov, tikkun olam. This is all here represented in his life, and this is what we need to keep, not for him, for all of us. Thank you.
My grandfather was my role model, my mentor and an inspiration. He profoundly influenced my life, as he did so many of us. While it is near impossible to sum up a man and a life that was so rich, spanned so many interests, countries, and eras, I'd like to reflect on three characteristics that I admired most in Opapa, the affectionate name we called him, and which have become guiding principles in my own life. The first was his ability to see the bigger picture and, crucially, to take action. So many people can talk a big game, but little comes of it. Not Opapa. No challenge was too great, no obstacle too large. Whether it was revitalizing Jewish studies in our universities, like the Weidenfeld Institute at Sussex, forging stronger bonds between European countries through dialogue and culture, or working to bring Catholicism and Judaism closer together, Opapa was relentless in pursuit of what he believed in. A driving force behind all of this was his love and commitment to Israel. He tirelessly worked to ensure a better future for the land that is now his final resting place. When we talked over an apple juice in one of his favorite haunts, or in the beautiful surroundings of his flat, a shrine to a life well lived, he always encouraged me to broaden my horizons, think big, follow through. He encouraged my move to the US for my master's and later to work, and inspired me to follow my passion, which has led to many years of fulfilling work in the international development sector, in particular living in Nigeria and Congo, and helping support fantastic coalitions of other big picture thinkers who see a better future for their country and are willing to act. The second was his intellectualism and internationalism. In the era of the soundbite, the dumbing down, the sacrifice of truth on the altar of populism, he stood for intellect, inquisitiveness, considered and reasoned argument, and respect for historical context. At a time when many were trying to close the doors to a changing world, Opapa threw them wide open. He wanted the global challenges that we face to be responsibly discussed, deliberated, and collective solutions found. From the moment I was old enough, Opapa would ask my opinion on the latest foreign event, always a bit of a daunting experience. Every tea time was an opportunity to set the world to rights, to have a debate, often ending up in an impassioned lecture imparting several centuries of context to an eager student. A simple task of clearing out some space in his library dragged on for an enjoyable afternoon as every title I shouted down from the ladder I had perched against the beautifully book-lined walls sparked a lengthy discussion of the author, the subject matter, the book's genesis. These simple moments with Opapa always somehow felt precious. I knew he wasn't quite like other people's granddads. I also knew he was instilling in me values for the future, that he wanted me to become someone who was inquisitive, historically informed, and international in outlook, something I try to practice as best I can. The third was his passion for ideas and for people and grounding his life around these. He once told me he would never stop working. He lived off ideas. He ate them for breakfast. He would take any opportunity to regale me with the exciting projects he had planned, and his enthusiasm was contagious. Every phone call and catch-up began with a slightly breathless reel through all his latest ideas, before asking about the latest on Boko Haram and how the rest of the family was getting on. His passion for ideas and people was self-reinforcing. His friends were the fuel and engine for his grand endeavors. A dinner party at his flat was not only a chance to enjoy the company of friends, but to bring people together to create something new and exciting. In classic Opapa style, one unwitting friend I brought to tea left with an impassioned request to write a book. So many of us here today have been involved in some way in his projects and schemes, buying into his visions, always delivered with such charm, a little twinkle, and gravitas for a better tomorrow. He was a great. When we said our final goodbyes, I got the chance to tell him once again how much I loved him and how grateful I was for him. However, I know that the best thank you I can ever give him is to continue to try and live a life that would have made him proud.
Michael sends his love and apologies for not being able to be here. And I, Alina Barnett, who I am George's granddaughter-in-law and a trustee of the Weidenfeld-Hoffman Trust, I took Michael's place to say a few words. And instead of telling you about my first experience with George, or our last when Clara and I and our girls were singing around his bedtime, Bruno Mars, Count on Me, I will leave that for next year, Annabelle. No pressure for organizing the next birthday. And I would instead, I'd like to tell you a few words about one of his long-lasting legacies, one that continues to thrive, the Weidenfeld-Hoffman Trust. And it all started with one of those brilliant ideas that we all know that he had. And some of those ideas came out of his love and admiration for Oxford and Cambridge and the education that this university provided. And Annabelle and Len already spoke briefly about the impressive Blavatny School of Government that rose out of that admiration. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Weidenfeld-Hoffman Trust, which came out of the same sort of admiration for education and his desire to give those that could have never hoped of studying in those universities a chance to do so. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this cause is that I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen how I felt it firsthand, how such generosity of thought and of deed can change one's life. About 20 years ago, I've benefited from a similar scholarship scheme that helped me progress from communist Romania to Budapest and Hungary through Soros's generosity. So hoping to continue the work that OPEPA started through the Weidenfeld-Hoffman Trust. After finishing their education at Oxford, the scholars go on to do many great things. Some of them go on to work in governments across the world. Some of them go and practice medicine and fight Ebola on the front line. Some of those, increasingly more often these days, start social enterprises in the countries where they started, where they come from. And in so many ways, they try to make a difference, which is something that George would have been very proud of. You'll hear from 3 alumni that are here, that live in Israel, about their experience of the program in a second. But before that, and I should say thank you to Alexandra, who has tirelessly driven this program through its stages. You'd hear a little bit about the program more widely, about the scholarship, the scholars' experience in Oxford, and about the leadership program that brings it all together. Thank you.
The The education and the training that I received helped me design, for example, a new governance system for the world's largest rural anti-poverty program, targeting more than 177 million citizens with services that will now be more free of corruption.
The WHT scholarship is one that I cherish up to date because first, it influenced my career path. It reinforced my desire to contribute to the socio-economic development of the African continent.
We had a lot in common in terms of our experiences, but also our concerns and ambitions for our countries. And it made us feel like part of a tribe, a community in Oxford.
Since 2007, over 300 Weidenfeld-Hoffman scholars from more than 70 countries have been awarded graduate scholarships at Oxford University. It was Lord Weidenfeld's vision that students from emerging and developing economies should have the chance to study at a world-class university. But he also wanted them to learn leadership skills which would equip them to return to their countries and make a huge difference. In this unique programme, all scholars participate in moral philosophy seminars, debate and on-camera presentation skills, business workshops, and also networking opportunities.
My experience in Oxford was really enriched by the supplementary learning that was part of the leadership program.
We all know how much Lord Weidenfeld enjoyed meeting and being with people. The scholars also really value their time getting to know each other, building bridges across the world, and respecting many different viewpoints. And out of this has grown an annual cookbook where they note down recipes that remind them of home.
It created strong bonds that will last a lifetime. And anytime I face challenges, professional challenges for instance, I would call my fellow scholars, we would discuss and encourage each other.
I learned more and I became a better person because I've been a part of WHT leadership program.
George rallied his friends as only he knew how, and with the generous support of many here this evening, an endowment has been raised for the academic courses of around 30 scholars a year, with new plans afoot to raise further funds to guarantee the all-important leadership program. Lord Weidenfeld enjoyed his time meeting the scholars. The Weidenfeld-Hoffman Trust is proud to be able to carry on his legacy for generations to come.
There have been such fundamental changes, positive changes in the way not only that I view myself, but also in the way that my life trajectory has changed, that I attribute directly to my time as a Weidenfeld and Hoffman scholar.
My name is Shivi Greenfield, and I was fortunate to be one of the first scholars to be accepted into the leadership program initiated and established by Lord Weidenfeld in 2007. I was an unusual candidate. At the time, I was a research student in philosophy with a specialty in an abstract field with absolutely no practical implications for the real world. I planned on becoming a professor in academia and did not hide my intentions during my acceptance interview. The other candidates competing for a place in the program were all outstanding practitioners from a variety of countries in the developing world, with ample experience in concrete field and an ambition to get the professional training to initiate a change in their home societies. On the face of it, they were all more suitable candidates to this program. How did I get so lucky? In one of the conversations with Lord Weidenfeld, I shared my wonder with him and told him that I wasn't sure I would have accepted myself into the program. He responded with a sentence that I remember until this day. I was making a mistake, he said, in differentiating between an academic philosopher and a practitioner servant in the public sector. Society can be improved only by people with vision, and visionaries who are not actively involved in social reform are not truly visionaries. It took me a long time to internalize the significance of these words. In the meantime, I spent 3 exciting years in the leadership program, which forced me to confront with the responsibilities that come with actual decision-making in the real world with real-life implications. These lessons left a deep impression on me. After I completed my postdoctorate at the NYU School of Law, and I was about to accept a position as a researcher at the Hebrew University, I decided that the time has come to dare to act in the real world. Inspired by Lord Weidenfeld's words and the leadership program, I gave up academia in favor of a management position at the Jewish Agency for Israel. I currently serve as a Deputy Director General for Strategy and Planning at the Jewish Agency, and I'm responsible for designing its operational plans worldwide. In Lord Weidenfeld's words, this is a position in which a philosopher can thrive and in which a visionary can find fulfillment. I would like to believe that Lord Weidenfeld would have been proud of me, not only for my decision to join the leadership of the Zionist vision in which he greatly believed and promoted, but also and primarily because it seems I have internalized the educational vision that the Weidenfeld program was designed to promote.
Back in 2007, together with my friend and colleague here, Shivi Greenfield, I was also part of the first cohort to receive the prestigious Weidenfeld Scholarship. Not only did it give me the opportunity to pursue studies at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute, it turned out to be a formative experience in my life, boosting my resolve to take a leading role in improving the state of the environment in Israel and with it, the well-being of Israelis. In Oxford, I had the privilege to meet with excellent and ambitious students from all over the world, share with them concerns about global trajectories, as well as hopes and ideas for a better future. The scholarship program instilled in us the conviction, time and again, that we, small, powerless, and isolated as we thought we were, could become part of a global change. Following graduation, I became the CEO of the Israel Society of Ecology and Environmental Sciences, transforming the organization into an impactful science-to-policy agent. One example of many that demonstrate the influence that the Weidenfeld Leadership Program had on me was my initiation of a fellowship program. In 2010, I founded Mimshak, which means interface in Hebrew, a science-to-policy fellowships program which brings remarkably talented PhD students to serve as scientific advisors to high-ranking public officials in Israel. This program, which is now finishing its 8th cohort, has successfully positioned close to 50 young environmental experts in almost every government ministry and other public authorities as well. Last year, it received the Knesset Chairperson's Quality of Life Award. In the last 3 years, I have served as the head of the environmental program at Yad HaNadiv, the Rothschild Philanthropy in Israel, where we are working to build comprehensive initiatives in collaboration with government agencies and civil organizations to promote environmental causes in Israel. I'm convinced that the Weidenfeld program gave me the opportunity to lead a more meaningful life and to make a tangible impact on the society which I live in.
It is a known saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think that examples can have the same illuminating ability, and so I would like to share an ongoing one with you in order to convey how the Weidenfeld-Hoffman Scholarship has influenced me. Just a few weeks ago, I ran into a bright PhD student here in Israel. He confided in me that when he was young, just 16 years old, he and his then-girlfriend got pregnant. Embarrassed, the PhD student explained that as a high schooler, he truly did not know how pregnancies come about. And this stemmed from a complete lack of sex education in his Israeli school. In the days that followed, I inquired more, and I found out, in fact, that there is no law in Israel even requiring sex ed in high schools today. Before my year as a Weidenfeld-Hoffman scholar, I would have gotten angry about this issue and vented to a few friends. But it most likely would have ended there, because I would have felt helpless in this situation. But now, after having received a year of methodical training about moral and practical leadership from WHT, I didn't feel powerless to act. I remembered the individuals whom I had spent time with in Oxford and in the program, and drew inspiration from them. I remembered Alex Olivares, a passionate lawyer from Chile who worked to advance public policy. With him in mind, I polled over 180 young women via Facebook, and the results were very grim. Over 50% of them, these young women, had not received any sex ed when they were in school in Israel. And then I remembered Sidhya, another WHT scholar from India, who had founded a primary school for children there. And this inspired me to reach out to nonprofits here in Israel, and to persist despite their initial disinterest. I finally found a nonprofit who was open to the idea of young men and women volunteering at schools to raise awareness of sex ed. The nonprofit and I are still discussing logistics, but I'm hopeful that a successful collaboration will be able to help and reach more youth. It is my hope that this humble example conveys how WHT changed me from a good-intentioned yet timid advocate to a confident and strong-willed one. On behalf of all the past and present Weidenfeld scholars, I want to thank you for the unique opportunity we had at Oxford. It was incredibly impactful to all of us. And thank you as well for inviting me here today. Thank you.
I must say it is an incredible pleasure listening to so many of his closest friends and family talking today and seeing everyone here. What an incredible celebration, and thank you so much, Omabel, for making it happen. Thank you also to Marsha and Tom and Yali for the beautiful music, and to the scholars, and I think it's so fitting to have young musicians playing today, because that was, for him, he drew his energy from a youth, and so it was wonderful to have you. I won't say that I'll keep my speech very short, because everyone that says that then rambles on for hours, but I will try. To everyone in this room, he was George. To Omabel, he was darling. To my mother, he was daddy. And as you heard from Clara, to his grandchildren, he was Opapa. And Opapa, as you've heard, was not only a truly incredible man, but also a very unique grandfather. Our relationship started with him a little later in life. He could relate to small children about as well as he could relate to small ideas. And in fact, I've got a beautiful photo of Opapa when he visited with Omabel in our flat in Berlin with my baby daughter Amelie at the time. And there's this gorgeous photo where he's doting over her. But actually, in reality, we put her in the lap, took the photo, and straight away was, what do I do now? Quick, take her away. But, as soon as we were in our late teens, and we could talk about topics and talk about the future and our career paths and what we were passionate about, then we all, started to grow very unique relationships and became very close. And I think each in our different way, and each of us he loved equally. He talked, so proudly of Benji, as he called him, for all that he achieved and for his generosity, not least to the Weidenfeld-Hoffman scholarships. He was so impressed with Natty, Nathaniel, for following his passion, for being entrepreneurial, and for making a great career out of his passion. And of course, we heard from Clara, who he was immensely proud of. So to me also, he wasn't just a grandfather. I mean, he became a hugely important mentor, an advisor, and a friend. And, also had such a profound impact on my life, as we heard from everyone that has spoken here, and I'm sure if I asked everyone in the audience, you would say the same thing. I think I'd also actually, as was just mentioned, I think if we did a hands-up poll, who did he ask in the room to write a book? I think most hands would go up at some point. It was Opapa that organized my first trip to Israel, and of course in true Opapa style, I met Ariel Sharon, Shimon Peres, and a whole host of wonderful Israel greats, including Mahmoud Abbas on a trip to Ramallah. So it was a very unique trip, and that's not your typical granddad. And it placed Israel firmly in my heart and part of my life mission. And ever since then, I've been coming back every year. And someone that really went every day, not just thinking about Israel, but doing something for Israel, as he once said to me. That was clearly his aim. He also encouraged me to go to Germany. Germany was extremely important for him because it was about the reconciliation of Germany and Israel. And key to that, Germany being a hugely important part in ensuring peace in Europe, ensuring that the darkest hour of history can never happen again. And I heeded his advice and went there for a summer in 2004, and that turned into 15 summers in Berlin, and I'm still living there. And in many ways it was through Opapa that I met my wonderful wife Pamela, and we now have 3 fantastic children, 2 of which have the middle names George and Arthur. I'll always remember actually his 89th birthday 11 years ago on Friday, because it was our wedding anniversary. And so we have this wonderful tradition that I share now, and we share Opapa's birthday each year with our wedding anniversary. And the incredible thing about that day was that he came in a wheelchair. You know, I think it was his knees or you know, something. So he came into the wheelchair, and yet at about 11 o'clock in the evening, when Charleston was playing, he got up on the dance floor and he was, you know, dancing around like this. It was such an incredible memory. You know, he introduced me to so many wonderful people that have helped me on my path, many in this room today, not least Matthias, to whom I'm grateful for 8 transformative years at Axel Springer. And, you know, so many fond memories. I wish I could stand here all night and talk to you about it. We'll have a lot of time later, actually. But you know, sitting in the Hotel Adlon late at night, I think there's many of you have been in that situation when you're dying to go to bed, and he says, let's have a nightcap, and has an apple juice, and, you know, and full of energy. You know, one time, I'll just, one anecdote which was, something that hasn't been mentioned, his incredible memory, which I unfortunately didn't inherit. But, you know, I was sitting there with him, and he said to me, you know, remind me again, how did you meet Pamela? And I said, you remember it was through Katrin von Tippelskirch. You introduced me through a friend. He said, yes, von Tippelskirch. Yes, well, her great-grandfather, Kurt von Tippelskirch, he went on, you know, for about 5 minutes, kind of biography of Kurt von Tippelskirch. And I said to him, well, how do you know all that? And he said, he paused and he reflected and said, I think I did a piece for him in the BBC in 1942. He once said, when death comes, I won't be there. And there's been times over the last few years that I've been happy that he hasn't seen the chaos that has ensued with Brexit and with rise of populism and everything. But I think today is proof that actually, for once in his life, he was wrong about that. He's so strongly here in every one of us, and so strongly here with us. And, you know, whether that's his values that Zippy talked about, deeply ingrained in all of us, whether that's his spirit or the seeds that he's planted that will continue to grow well beyond his lifetime. I'm still confident that we'll have some concrete proof of that. I did prophesize at his memorial that one day a book will fall down to earth titled God, an Autobiography, published by Weidenfeld-Nicholson. I'm still waiting, but standing here in the land of miracles, you know, who knows? And certainly, I think if there's one thing that George and Opapa taught us, that is that nothing is impossible. Thank you. Let me just say a couple of words. It's actually Matthias is about to come up. But seeing as you just seen the preview, hugely grateful to Matthias for creating an incredible film about George called My Friend George Weidenfeld in 2009. And it's such a beautiful film. The only shame is that it's in German. And so with Matthias's help, we've created a short excerpt that we'll show you after Matthias has spoken. So thank you so much as well for that and for this last thing.
So this is now the 13th and last speech tonight. George, you may ask why only 13, but that's it for tonight. Sorry for that. I remember when I was in Israel last time, it's just a couple of weeks ago in June, I had 2 hours of free time and I was walking through the old city and to the left of the Great Wall I looked to the Mount Olive and I thought spontaneously, actually I should go to see George's grave because I haven't been there since his burial in 16. So I grabbed a taxi and asked him to go to the top of the Mount Olive because I was absolutely convinced that I intuitively would find immediately his position. That was not the case, so I asked the driver what I could do. Then he said, well, I know a guy here who may know the place. So I asked the guy whether he knows the place. He says, no, I know George Weidenfeld, but I don't know how to find it. But actually his widow is occasionally here, so perhaps she knows it. Oh, I said, that's a great idea. So I called Annabelle, and Annabelle said, yeah, actually, but I don't exactly remember how you get there. So perhaps you asked just the driver with whom I went there. So I called the driver who said, actually, it's too complicated to describe, but I know a guy who will definitely guide you there. And with this guy, I found his place, which was much better located than I thought, not on the top of the Mount Olive, but right in front of the wall through which the Messiah is going to come. So George is going to be first served if the Messiah comes. So 2 learnings from that experience about George's secrets of success. One is if you want to achieve a goal, you have to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And the second thing is where I am, where George is the center. It is the best location. He was always sitting at the best tables with the most interesting people, and where he was the center. And I think we also feel it tonight. I mean, we all came, some came from the other end of the world. We wanted to be here, but somehow the magnet is still there. There is no other center in the room. George is irreplaceable. And this charisma that he had, this energy, this magnetism, I think definitely was one of the secrets of his success. And I think it is absolutely impressive how he managed to build his empire. And it was an empire not because of his profession, but because of his personality. Whether he worked for the BBC or whether he worked for Chaim Weizmann as the first chief of staff, or whether he worked as a publisher for Weidenfeld and Nicholson, or whether he organized the conferences, it was never the job who created his importance. It was his own charisma, his own energy and intelligence. And I think that is really something that is very impressive. Norman Foster once summarized it in the shortest form. He said, George is a force. George Weidenfeld really was a force, and I just want to add 2 aspects of what, in a way, we all can learn from him, or where at least he impressed me most. And that is, first, his unparalleled ability to combine ultimate smart diplomacy with principledness and decisiveness. Of course he was a charmeur. Of course he knew exactly how to convince people, how to seduce people, how to be very nuanced, very diplomatic, if it is about talking to politicians or business people or talking to women. By the way, he shared with me a really life-changing secret and told me, whenever in life you talk to a beauty, never make compliments about her beauty. Always make compliments about her intelligence. And whenever you meet a very intellectual woman, never make compliments about her intelligence, always compliment her beauty, even if she isn't. Yeah, so that is really something that helped me a lot since then. However, with this smartness, with this diplomacy, he was able to basically convince people and build bridges, and he was a big bridge builder, no question, but at the same time, he was very, very principled, and he was in a way also a fighter. He had his principles, and whether it was about the American-European relationship, where he said this transatlantic alliance is more important than a certain president or government, we have to really keep it up, or whether it was, by the way, about the German unification. He was one of the very, very few, if not one of the first, who publicly basically called for a revolution in Germany. It was 1986 when he said in a public speech to young people, if I were in your place, I would organize a revolution. This separation cannot continue. We have to achieve a reunification. And then when it happened 3 years later, he wrote a very important editorial in the Times in London, which I think really made a big difference and helped to convince the skeptical British government to support the reunification. So he had his principles and he fought for it. He was a great European and there were no compromises. He was in his very last years and particularly month very determined about Islamic fundamentalism. He was merciless about it. And in his last interview, he shared his worries for Europe and for new waves of anti-Semitism that he foresaw, unfortunately rightly so. I'm glad that he did not have to see developments in Germany where people are spitting on rabbis on streets in Berlin. But in a way, he had these kind of concerns and worries, and he spoke about it, and he was very clear and very determined. And of course, the most determined and important topic for him was his passion for Israel, his Zionism, which has been mentioned many times tonight. I remember when I met him, we have spent so many days and weeks here in Israel. One day in Jerusalem, I asked him, where does this Zionism come from? And he said, well, I'm not religious. It has nothing to do with religion. It is not that much a political thing or a national thing. It is really a feeling of belonging. It is a tribal feeling. And I remember that very well. I found that term of a feeling of belonging and of a tribal feeling a wonderful way to put it and to explain his motivation. The second thing, and with that I will conclude, what impressed me so much and what we all can learn from him was his way to embrace the future and with that remain young. I mean, aging is an insult. We all know it. It is very hard to find good aspects about getting older, but he is one of the few role models that I have that are absolutely motivating that getting old, getting very old, actually can be a wonderful thing. And why was it wonderful for him and why was it wonderful with him? Because he had, apart from, a strong physical condition, but much more importantly, a very strong mental condition that was always forward-looking and was always interesting in the future. And I will never forget his eyes when we were speaking every other night about a plan, about a conference in 5 years, or about a holiday trip that we're going to do next summer. He always had this kind of youngish twinkle in his eyes. It was almost like talking to a 25-year-old. And that was so contagious in a way, this kind of youngish, forward-looking curiousness. And also the curiosity for everything, being it high politics, being it high gossip, or being it sometimes low gossip. I mean, he really could discuss and talk about everything with this passion, and in such a kind of youngish way that it was also fascinating for young people. And I know that all these young people who tried to get close to him, to meet him, who found him interesting, by the way, I met him when I was also very young in 88, although he was then already much older than I was, but he was a kind of fascinating role model because a relatively old man that, but still so incredibly young and forward-looking. That makes him also fascinating for my oldest son Moritz, who wanted to join here to be with us tonight. It's not that I tried to convince him, or he just felt the urge to be here because George was almost like the same generation. I think this secret that he had is unparalleled, and even if there were some downsides of aging, he found a way to explain it in the best possible way. I never will forget when I was surprised when we had a meeting at the airport to travel to New York. He showed up in a wheelchair, and I said, "Wow, George, what happens? Why are you in a wheelchair? I mean, you're still okay." He said, "You know what? I'm just pretending to be old. I just get faster through the border control of the wheelchair." So this was his way to deal with that. I really want to keep him as a role model, and I think we all should somehow carry that spirit forward that defined his life until the very last moment. when, I think it was 1 or 2 days before he died, I was with my family, with all 3 kids in a car in Berlin driving, and suddenly we had the idea to call George, and then Annabelle took the phone and we decided to put it on FaceTime, and we saw George surrounded by his family, by his entire family, smiling, in a good mood, although terribly sick, and we could feel that it may not last too long. But he was in a terrific spirit, and then suddenly he started to sing Viennese student songs. And in that spirit, he died. In that spirit, we should always remember him. This spirit should be our role model, and I can only say, George, I miss you every day. The friend I want to talk about, and who you see here walking through the corridors of the Vienna Hofburg, went as a child by the name of Arthur. Later, he became George Weidenfeld. Still later, Lord Weidenfeld. Born in 1919, Jew, Holocaust survivor, and German patriot. Austrian, Englishman, friend of America, Zionist, a charmer of women, opera connoisseur, one of the most respected British publishers, one of the most influential networkers in international politics, and one without whom the birth of the State of Israel and German reunification would probably have gone a little differently.
George Weidenfeld ist ein Beispiel von jemandem, der sich für alles interessiert. Nichts auf dieser Welt ist fremd für ihn.
Er ist ein nobler Mann.
Fast ein Synonym für europäische Geschichte und europäische Vielfalt.
Ich finde, solche Berater wie Lord Weidenfeld brauchen wir dringend in der Politik. Ohne solche Persönlichkeiten wäre die Politik blutarm.
Ich finde, das ist großartig für einen Menschen mit diesem Lebensweg. Davor kann man ja einfach nur Respekt haben.
Für ihn gilt, was über Thomas Mann gesagt wurde, er ist ein Zauberer.
Whether President, Prime Minister or Chancellor, George Weidenfeld has access to the most powerful people in the world, as a mediator and mentor. He prefers to organize his visits not pompously through the main entrance, but inconspicuously through the back door. To be able to observe the bridge builder, private ambassador, and political impresario, now and again for a few days over the period of a year on his restless journeys, naturally not objectively, but highly subjectively, as a friend and companion, is a truly global experience. Our destinations are Vienna, London, Tel Aviv, New York, Berlin, with busy schedules that Weidenfeld's wife, Lady Annabelle, manages.
Wir haben eine geheime Zeit gesprochen. Wenn wir zum Beispiel im großen Saal sind und nicht also getrennt voneinander, verschiedenen Tischen sitzen oder verschiedenen Ecken des Raumes und uns Zeichen geben wollen, ob wir uns unterhalten oder langweilen. Diese Folge, wenn wir das machen, heißt das, wir unterhalten uns. Wenn wir das machen, dann sind wir furchtbar gelangweilt. So wissen wir über die Stimmungslage.
Sie haben kürzlich noch etwas sehr Schönes gesagt. Das möchte ich hier an diesem Abend nicht unerwähnt lassen. Ich zitiere: Deutschland soll stolz auf sich sein. Ende des Zitats. Diese Aufforderung hat mir sehr gefallen. Denn ich denke manchmal, dass wir als Deutsche in den vergangenen Jahrzehnten viel mehr erreicht haben, als wir mitunter selbst wahrnehmen. Und deshalb sind wir dankbar, wenn Freunde uns dies ab und zu in Erinnerung rufen.
Vienna, Gumpendorf, today suburban Tristesse, 90 years ago a poor people's quarter. Arthur Weidenfeld was born the child of a Ukrainian immigrant on the 30th of September 1919 in the Gumpendorfer Straße 111, in the rear building of the second backyard, as the very back at the very bottom, as an only child and a loner, one who soon wants to show the whole world.
Das ist ein Neubau, das ist nicht 88 Jahre alt.
Und wie groß war eure Wohnung?
Wir hatten 4 Zimmer, ein Schlafzimmer, ein Kinderzimmer, ein Speisezimmer, ein Mädchenzimmer und ein Herrenzimmer, Library. Mein Vater, meine Mutter mein väterlicher Großvater und ich 3 Jahre alt oder so.
At the age of 7, his uncle takes him to the opera for the first time. A performance by Don Giovanni starts a lifelong passion. The Vienna State Opera becomes a place to escape from the triste suburbs of Vienna, great opera that promises opportunities for advancement. In addition to the spirit and great voices, the young man also observes and admires glamour and great company. Even today, the Weidenfelds hardly miss an opera production in London and New York or the festival premieres in Salzburg and Bayreuth.
Bist du aufgeregt in der Oper? Ja, ich bin aufgeregt in der Oper, ja. Ich finde es immer, ich denke an so alle möglichen Dinge fließen so in mein Gedächtnis. Nicht nur das Werk, die Musik, die Vorstellung, aber auch der Zeitgeist der Schöpfung dieses Werkes.
In the month before the founding of the State of Israel, what hardly anyone knows is how a London department store played a central role. On a vacant floor of Marks & Spencer, of which the owners were Jews, merchants, intellectuals, officials and emissaries from the circle of the president-elect Chaim Weizmann brood and quarrel about the structures of their future polity.
Weizmann hätte ohne die Marx und Sief es nicht so weit gebracht, denn sie hatten Gründungsaktien geschenkt, ihn finanziell unabhängig zu machen.
The young publicist Weidenfeld is in the thick of it all. He marries Jane Sief, the daughter of the influential trade dynasty, and in 1949, Weidenfeld interrupts his promising publishing life in England to go into politics in Israel.
Und plötzlich bekam ich eine Einladung von Weizmann, als Gast bei ihm eine Woche in Rehovot, in seinem sogenannten Weißen Haus zu verbringen. Das Verhältnis zwischen Ben-Gurion und Weizmann war schlecht. Der Mann, der vermitteln wollte, war der Außenminister Charet. Und da haben sie gesagt, das wäre sehr gut. Da müssen wir jemanden hinschicken, der bei ihm arbeitet, der nicht schon kompromittiert ist in diesen Parteikämpfen.
At the age of 30, he becomes the chief of a cabinet to the first president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann.
Du hast ja mit Weizmann hier vielleicht das wichtigste Jahr deines Lebens verbracht.
Das Interessanteste, vielleicht das wichtigste Jahr meines Lebens verbracht und bin sehr gerührt, hier zu sein. Ich bin nicht herumgegangen, mir alle Zimmer angeschaut. Das war sein Arbeitszimmer, aber er war ja schon etwas kränklich und so weiter. Er hat eigentlich am liebsten im Garten mit mir gearbeitet. Er saß unter einem schönen Baum und wir hatten politische Probleme besprochen. Ich habe das große Glück gehabt, dass der Stabschef von Ben-Gurion eben Teddy Kollek war, ein anderer Wiener, ein unerhört interessanter, einsichtsvoller Mann. Und der hat mir sehr geholfen, diese Brücke zu bauen.
Tel Aviv, in the back room of a small restaurant, our friend George invites for dinner. Israel's leading industrialists, scientists, journalists and politicians sit close to each other. Shimon Peres is there, and as a surprise guest, called up upon spontaneously by Weidenfeld, Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni comes along later. Political opponents peacefully discuss the security situation and, as the hour gets late, also in all openness about the time after Prime Minister Olmert. A little later, Social Democrat Peres becomes president, and the conservative Livni takes her place in the chair once occupied by Ben-Gurion. Between all the chairs, between all the fronts, and always in the center of power, our friend George. Who else?
Warum ist der radikalisierte Islam, der fundamentalistische Islam für dich heute die größte Herausforderung, die größte Gefahr der Menschheit?
Weil er universell ist in einer Weise, nicht einmal das Dritte Reich war. Im Dritten Reich, wenn du weder Jude, Roma oder Homosexueller war, hast du ganz angenehm leben können, wenn du dich mit dem Regime einverstanden hast. Für die islamistischen Extremen gibt es nur Gläubige und Ungläubige und ein Weltkalifat, das keine Grenzen kennt. Und daher, und auch eine Art einer Lust am Töten, Nicht wahr? Eine Grausamkeit, die einzigartig ist.
In Israel, George meets his fourth wife, Annabel. At that time, still together with the pianist Arthur Rubinstein. The same Rubinstein that Thomas Mann once called a lucky virtuoso. Almost the entire Israeli government is present at the wedding. The then mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, and Shimon Peres are best men.
Es ist mir endlich gelungen, sehr spät im Leben, jemanden zu finden, mit dem ich glücklich war. Ich habe eigentlich wirklich noch nie jemanden in meinem Leben gekannt als Freund, mit dem man so viel gemeinsam hat. Und sie ist sehr geschätzt auch von Leuten, die mit mir nicht so gut stehen, weil sie also als ein sehr ehrlicher, eine echte Persönlichkeit hat.
Wir sind uns seit Jahrzehnten immer wieder begegnet. Ich habe viel von ihm gelernt. Er ist einer der klügsten und der gebildetsten Zeitgenossen, die mir, ich will salopp sagen, über den Weg gelaufen sind.
Warum ist Berlin für dich so wichtig?
Weil Berlin meiner Ansicht nach die Aufgabe hat und die Möglichkeit hat, eine wirklich große zentrale Rolle in der Zeitgeschichte zu spielen. Denn ich glaube, dass Deutschland heute das wichtigste Land in Europa ist. Und was sich in Deutschland abspielt und abspielen wird, kann von entscheidender Bedeutung sein in der Lösung der großen Krisen unserer Zeit.
Gehen die Deutschen richtig um mit ihrer Hauptstadt?
Ich glaube, sie unterschätzen die Hauptstadt. Das heißt, sie unterschätzen sich, ganz kurz gesagt. Sie wollen sich nicht trennen von der Idee, dass sie der Welt sagen, ohne mich, dass sie eine große Schweiz sind, dass sie Ruhe haben wollen. Sie können es sich nicht leisten. Sie müssen diese Rolle spielen. Und wenn sie diese wichtige Rolle verspielen, dann sind wir alle in einer furchtbaren Situation.
Kann es sein, dass am Ende alles berufliches Streben nur stilisiertes Balzverhalten ist? Dass es am Ende nur darum geht, Frauen zu gewinnen?
Bis zu einem gewissen Lebensalter, ja.
Was macht eine Frau für dich unwiderstehlich?
Wenn sie Geist und auch Erotik zur gleichen Zeit aussprüht.
Obwohl du mir mal verraten hast, dass du bei hübschen Frauen immer ihren Intellekt lobst, während du bei intelligenten Frauen immer ihre Schönheit lobst.
Das ist Strategie. Das ist Strategie.
Wenn du die Wahl hättest zwischen einem Abendessen mit Liz Mohn oder Liz Hurley, mit wem würdest du lieber essen?
Mit Liz Mohn.
Hast du keine Angst vor dem Tod?
Ich denke nicht an den Tod. Wo ich bin, ist nicht der Tod. Wo der Tod ist, bin ich nicht. Warum soll ich ihn fürchten?